Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Michael Peterson. I'm a professor at DTU Photonics. It's a great honor for me to welcome you here at DTU campus to participate in this full-day summit on integrative lighting. As you know, light is very important. We cannot see light, but light helps us to see. More importantly, light is a key for life. From cell to complex form of life, from plants to mammals. Being in good health is very important, and it depends on the light. Unhealthy light exposure during the day can result in poor health condition and even in serious illness and cancer or diabetes. We need to quantify the light during the day, the right quality of light at the right time. This is the goal of our summit today. Therefore, I hope that you will help to embrace these challenges for the future in integrative lighting. And therefore, we have today many of the best experts from academia and industry to enlighten the latest development in integrative lighting.
The fact that about 90% of our lives are indoor. Take your own age, multiply by 0.9, and then you find out how many years you spend in your life indoor. Given that fact, and given the fact that that is probably not going to change dramatically in the years to come, of course, we have an extremely important agenda here. How do we create a better life indoor, more healthy buildings, as with respect to light, of course, but also air and sound for that matter. Today we are discussing the light issue, of course.
Right, let's kick off with circadian rhythms. And really, it's sort of stating the obvious, but I think it's worth stating that the 24-hour revolution of the Earth on its axis presents immense complexity to life on Earth. Of course, there's the day-night cycle, which is accompanied by a whole raft of different sorts of ecological changes. Obviously, the amount of light, but also temperature, food availability, and essentially every other factor that determines life on Earth. And in response to this 24-hour revolution, all life on Earth has evolved a response. In humans, of course, we have the sleep consciousness cycle. Sleep is typified by physical inactivity, but as we'll discuss, so many really important things are going on whilst we sleep. And in fact, sleep, the quality of sleep defines the quality of our consciousness. But of course, these are two profoundly different states, sleep and consciousness. And so it's no great surprise that sleep and consciousness are underpinned by an incredibly different sort of biology. But what I wanted to just touch on also is some of the consequences of having a dynamic physiology and knowing about those changes, how they might influence, for example, clinical treatments. Let me just give you a few examples. Here we have some data on the frequency of ischemic stroke. We go back to this image that we saw earlier, and we see systolic blood pressure. And we see that systolic blood pressure has a very sharp rise for around about 6 o'clock in the morning to around about 12 noon. And that 6 a.m. to 12 noon window maps very precisely onto the frequency of stroke. And in fact, between 6 a.m. and 12 noon, there's about a 50% greater chance of having a stroke than any other time of the day. So let's hope we all make it to the end of this lecture. If we do, then we've survived the most dangerous part of the day. Okay, what this timing sort of implies, though, is that when do we take our stroke medication? Many of us will be taking our stroke medication actually 8, 9 o'clock, which is the peak time for stroke. Ideally, we should be taking it, at 5 o'clock before that sharp rise occurs. And so we've got to think of clever ways to deliver medications so that they actually intersect when they're going to be most useful. Also, I guess it's information that could be used to prepare our healthcare services. Knowing that there's going to be that peak in stroke between 6 a.m. and 12 noon, are our ambulance crews and hospitals are suitably prepared to cope with that blip of stroke in time. And really, this leads me to the next point, which is the circadian timing of drug delivery or chronotherapeutics. This is a long history, and this is a slide that goes back, or data that goes back to 1993. And I deliberately chose an old example because this is knowledge that's been around for a long time. This is a particular study by Rivard and colleagues. And essentially what they did was give chemotherapy either in the morning or the evening. And what was extraordinary is that the risk of relapse was 2.5-fold times higher if the chemotherapy was given in the morning compared to the evening. So same drug, same dose, different time. Those kids that got it in the evening had a 2.5-fold greater chance of survival than those that had it in the morning. This is an old example, but let's now move to a more recent example, and we move from chemotherapy to radiotherapy. And this is the impact of the time of whole brain radiotherapy on overall survival in patients with multiple brain tumors. And it's a randomized controlled trial. And the radiotherapy was given either 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., or 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And these are the data. So we see that the 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. group all were dead by approximately 6 months. The midday group, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., all were dead by 24 months, but you see a very clear separation between the morning and the midday group. And what's extraordinary is that the group that had radiotherapy between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., 10% were still alive at 36 months. So again, same treatment, same condition, different time, profoundly different changes in long-term survival. And finally, an example of time of day of immunization for the influenza vaccine. And this, of course, has high pertinence at the moment with COVID. And so we see here, this was a group of 70-year-old individuals, roughly 70 years of age, and they had their vaccine either in the morning or the afternoon. And we're looking here at the effectiveness of the vaccine in generating an antibody response. The higher the titer, the more effective the vaccination was. And so this is the afternoon group, and we see here's the baseline and here's the follow-up. So, an antibody titer of around 100. But those in the morning had an antibody titer around 400. So again, same vaccine, different time, almost a 4-fold increase in effectiveness by having your vaccination in the morning rather than the afternoon. So the point I'm trying to make is that time of day matters, and the internal clock is dictating so many of our different physiological and behavioral parameters. If we look at some of the changes that we see across the day-night cycle, here we see a number of boxes. The time scale is from 2 p.m. to 2 p.m., so a 24-hour time base. And this sort of the gray area here is roughly nighttime when we might be asleep. If we just look at one of these hormones and we see melatonin, and we can talk about melatonin in the discussion period. Melatonin, as we will perhaps touch on, is a modulator of sleep. It is not a sleep hormone. But the key point here is that melatonin is rising in anticipation of dark. It peaks, and then in anticipation of dawn, it begins to decline. And what we see in melatonin is replicated in many other physiological parameters. Growth hormone here is almost exclusively released during the first half of the sleep episode. If we don't sleep actually this growth hormone release is massively truncated. Core body temperature, and in fact this drop in core body temperature might be rather important in sleep initiation. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises in anticipation of activity. Testosterone is again rising with this dawn morning peak. And indeed, our ability to process information, it changes across the day. It's low point in the early hours of the morning, peaking in the early part of the day, from late morning to mid-afternoon. Okay, well, the point is that these changes, these 24-hour changes, will continue under constant conditions. And they are in large part, but not exclusively, driven or underpinned by the circadian system. And we'll talk about the biological clock and the circadian system in a few moments. Let's now look at the generation of circadian rhythms. So, of course, we see here a cartoon of the brain, and here's the hypothalamus. And if we take a small part of the hypothalamus and we then orientate to a frontal section, we see here where the optic nerves come into the brain, the optic